Hello everyone, my name is Philo, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Juno from Juno Does World Building.
Hello!
We're doing a collab tied to a new world I'm creating called The Bay, which I've recently released an introductory video to. If you haven't seen it yet, watch it after this one, but here I'll give you some basic information about it. The Bay is a new world I'll be working on alongside Keisha's, but they are entirely separate. Instead of the whole planet approach I've been taking with Keisha's, the Bay will focus on a group of tribes isolated from the outside world by natural barriers, and it will showcase the tribes' interactions with each other on land and by sea via the aforementioned Bay. Essential information for this world might include the fact that it takes place before, during, and after the transition from Neolithic life to Bronze Age life, a little earlier than Keisha's.
However, the Neolithic and Bronze Age of this world last much longer than their corresponding time periods on Earth, and that's because the inhabitants of the Bay live, on average, up to 200 years each. These longer lifespans have all sorts of impacts, both in biology and culture, especially in regards to language evolution and the development of technology.
Exactly, so this video will center around the societal impact that these longer lifespans will have. There are three things I'd like to cover specifically: marriage, reputation, and funerary rites.
Philo and I spent lots of time brainstorming the broad impacts of this seemingly simple change in physiology. There are too many fine-tuned aspects to cover in a single video, hence we'll be focusing on the aforementioned.
So, ready to see what life might be like if you could live to 200? To start off, we'll be discussing how the concept of marriage changes with lifespan. First, though, a change I made specifically to these people. They have two chances in life to reproduce. I don't mean they're only able to have two children. I mean that they have two periods of time in which they can raise kids. From their 30s to their 50s is their first spurt of fertility, when they have a family, raise some kids, and send them off on their merry way to go start families of their own. Then comes round two, starting in their 90s and petering out around age 115.
Round 2, as Philo termed it, is placed at a very specific time in life. It's about 40 years after the end of the first spurt of fertility, giving people time to raise their kids and see their young adult progeny off. There's also some downtime between family raising, leading to the marriage discussion. Let's face it, 170 years with the same person is a lot, and a lot of people probably couldn't handle that. And in a time when people marry not for love, but for status or simply the biological drive to reproduce, these Bay people wouldn't feel bad about leaving each other for someone else. Thus, marriage is not a lifelong agreement, but a sort of contract of limited duration. Oftentimes, after the first family is raised, the couple will split up per the terms of that contract. This isn't viewed as a divorce unless they split before their contract is up.
In the downtime between families, most people look for new spouses, not really aging much, at least physically. Then, when they find spouse number two, they run the gamut again, raising a second family, often with a new spouse. Some marry for life, however, and have two families with the same spouse, or even just one. Having two families and having plenty of time to do so has the added effect of decreasing the amount of desired children, and oftentimes families aren't that large. Usually, couples have 4 to 7 children per family, and this keeps the population fairly stable around the bay, not to mention infant mortality rates, which we'll get to later. Anyway, in addition to complicating family trees, this two family system has some cultural traditions surrounding it. If a child from the younger family is in need of aid and asks for help, children from the older family are expected to provide help, even though the two aren't necessarily very close. This even goes so far as shunning the family of the older child if he or she doesn't help, but this usually doesn't happen. Usually.
Switching to a less dense topic, these long-lived people have more opportunity to become living legends a la biblical Methuselah, given the longer amount of time they're able to spend gaining prestige and performing great deeds. And given that living memory is a much longer period of time among them, the distortion of information over time is much less pronounced than in our own world. It's much easier to find out what happened a century ago when there were people alive at that time, or people who know people who were.
Now for the grim part of this video: death rites. Among the Bay folk, child deaths are viewed as possibly the most tragic, traumatic event that could possibly occur. Living in a world just coming out of the Neolithic age, child mortality rates are somewhat high as well, and every child is given an elaborate, meaningful funeral should they die early.
These funerals include all the children of the village gathering and making items for the past to take to the afterlife, and then presenting the body with these items. The women of the village gather to create a tapestry depicting the child's life, often expanding beyond death to include what they thought the child might have become.
And finally, the men of the village gather, select their best cow, and kill it, placing its skull with the child to help guide it through the afterlife, since most Bay folk have the same general idea of cattle acting as psychopomps, even if the different tribes have wildly different religions.
For other deaths, funerals tend to be on the celebratory, positive type. A death at 200 is not seen as a sad event for the Bay folk. Instead, they look back on the life of that person with joy and reverence. Different kinds of people receive different accommodations when setting off for the afterlife. A soldier's coffin might be borne on the shoulders of their companions, marching in step to chants of war, while a beloved poet may instead be celebrated with festivals of art.
As you can see, the effects of living to 200 are quite far reaching. I hope this video has got you thinking and is helpful to your own world building projects if they happen to be similar. Take care and see you in the next video.